wonderful world of Disney.
Run, Lightbuck, run.
And now your host, Walt Disney.
In searching for nature stories, we've sometimes gone to faraway places like Asia, Australia, South America, and Africa. And then every once in a while, we wake up to the fact that there's a fascinating animal we've overlooked living out its life practically in our own backyard. That's the case on this program. The story is about a real speed burner. Now, just offhand, what North American animal would you say could run nearly 60 miles an hour? A good racehorse will do only about half that. Well, it's the pronghorn antelope. Now, here's a true native, as western as sagebrush and as typical of the prairie as the bison and the coyote. When the old song mentions where the deer and the antelope play, he's the one they're talking about. Now, the pronghorn runs for the pure pleasure of it. It's his whole life, practically, and his only defense. If danger threatens, he simply takes to his heels. Now, one of his other traits is a great curiosity. And our story is about a young pronghorn who strikes up a curious friendship with an old prospector. Later, as things turn out, this acquaintance becomes very important. It saves his life.
Wild and free as the prairie breeze, the American pronghorn likes nothing better than running and running and more running. It's a thing he does real pretty like, raising little spaced out puffs of dust and crossing more territory in a few minutes than most critters can travel in a day. Fact is, that's what's kept him alive in the world today, kicking up his heels and showing a clean and classy getaway to his enemies. Now, this story is about a junior member of the breed, a little fella called Lightbuck. How he got his name we'll come to later. But on this particular morning we speak of, he wasn't showing much heel to anybody. Instead of that, he was keeping pretty close to his mother, as all good young'uns should. This, it turned out, was a real smart place to be. For it wasn't long for a coyote came on the scene. Well, sir, there's more ways of outsmarting a coyote than just running. Now, nature sort of made an antelope on stilts, so he could walk safely in a cactus garden. This is something every mother antelope knows by heart. When a youngster hasn't got his full strength and stamina yet, you fall back on other tricks. And one of them is the old cactus patch strategy. didn't take long for Mr. Coyote to get the point. Coyotes and cactus just don't mix. He'd been made out a fool, and he sort of knew it. Well, sir, one foolish move often leads to another. And more or less before he'd stopped to reason it out, the overeager coyote was chasing the grown-ups. Even he should have known better, but he was working off his chagrin mostly. Of course, Lightbuck's mother was all for it. The farther he wanted to follow, the better. And she took the trouble to lead him a merry old chase. And so ended that day's little adventure. Lightbuck had learned a trick he'd always remember. When in trouble, stick to stickers and mother. It was several days later that Lightbuck came on the bear. It was a morning when he was out on his own. And somewhat lucky for him, the bear was a bit preoccupied. A bear is a kind of a comedian to start with, and so it's merely his nature to make a big thing of just taking a bath. He needs a big puddle, because he's determined to make a big splash. To Lightbuck, it was all kind of fascinating. Looked like fun. Quite inviting, in fact, but maybe not with a bear in the same tub. It took little more than instinct to tell him that, especially when the bear hauled out on the bank looking hungry and prowling and like he was ready for a meal. Later on, Lightbuck located a private swimming hole of his own and decided he'd have a go at it. Well, sir, skinny as he was, he found he could make a fair splash, too. It was all real refreshing. Enough to set a fella up and make him feel he could buffalo anybody. With all young'uns, there's a first time for everything. And sometimes it can be a scary experience. Lightbuck's first thunderstorm took him by surprise. And thunder on the prairie can sound like cannon. Lightbuck's reaction was to try and run away from it. When the storm had run its course and Lightbuck had about run himself out, he found he was alone, completely confused and just plain lost. It was just about then he spotted some legs under a tree, and he ambled over to see who it might be. Well, sir, it turned out to be just about the weirdest critter he'd ever laid eyes on. And right next to it, one even stranger looking, me. I guess if I'd have been him, I'd have panicked too. I wasn't going to hurt him, but then I realized he couldn't know that. Besides, his mom had probably taught him to play it safe and run away from anything unfamiliar. Well, next thing I knew, he'd gone and got himself all strung up in some wild gourd vines. I don't know quite how he did it, but he was trussed up like a roped calf. Well, I was willing to help him if he'd let me. I noticed how pretty he was. His coat soft as buckskin, and I figured then and there he ought to be called Lightbuck. That's if he needed a name, which of course he didn't. About then, his mother came looking for him. And I sort of aimed him in the right direction. I was glad to see him back where he belonged. And to tell the truth, I never really expected to see him again. Well, winter came on, and the wolves. I had things to do, and I'd long since dismissed him from my mind. I was no better off than the other critters on that range. We was all just coping and fighting to stay alive, wolves included. I tell you, that was the worst winter in 50 years. Winter-killed cattle was lying everywhere. Of course, that meant a break for the wolves, so at least some good came of it. But the grazing tribes were mighty hard hit. Grass eaters like the pronghorns were finding their forage pretty scarce. I knew it was going to be rough, and get even rougher when I watched the buffalo plodding along in drifts up to their knees. I wasn't doing too well myself. Me and Maud, we was barely getting by. Then one cold, freezing morning, I stumbled on Lightbuck. I knew it was him. The color was unmistakable, and I sort of had a feeling he recognized me too. He was in kind of a fix, down in a drift with a bad leg, Sure pray for the wolves if I hadn't happened along. Well, light buck, little fella, I says to myself, I got a way of talking to myself. You better come with me. Maud, old gal, I says. I talk to my burro like she could understand, which she does. Maud, old gal, you're gonna have a passenger. And that's how I met Light Buck again. And that's how he came to spend the winter with me. You see, I was then heading for my winter diggings, which are a kind of special place. Now, some folks, they go off to places like Florida or some tropical island to get away from winter. Me and Maud and Light Buck, we just planned on dropping down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. It's a whole different climate. Winter up on top and perpetual summer below. I'd long since found that by going down about 5,500 feet of altitude, I was practically going to a new climate zone and bringing the temperature up about 50 degrees at the same time. Little old Light Buck, he stuck it out with us, riding along real nice. The switchbacks and the drop-offs didn't seem to bother him at all. For nigh on to 40 years I'd been wintering here. And what with doing a little more every year, I'd got me a right snug little hideaway. Leastwise, me and Maud thought so. Well, once we got there, my first concern was to make Light Buck more comfortable. And when you live like I do, hand to mouth, so to speak, you sometimes have to improvise. I was used to that. I can make do with next to nothing. My whole house I picked up stone by stone. And so I set to work. It might have looked like I was starting kindling for a fire, but that could come later. Right now, I had other plans. I'd never rigged up an animal hospital before, but I figured I could do it as well as the next man. I had in mind a kind of homemade hammock or a sling. I knew the first thing was to get the weight off of that bad knee. I will say for Lightbuck, he was patient. He didn't have much to say about it, of course, but even so, he took it all without a fuss. And that helped, because that's what I wanted for him, complete rest and quiet. Next thing, I went about opening up the house, letting some air in, and chasing my tenants out. I got tenants who come every year, and they don't pay any rent, but they make life more interesting, and that's all I care about. I can be friends with anybody, tarantulas even, as long as they keep out from underfoot. That particular season, I found my bed was being used by some strangers. At first, I thought it was mice, but it turned out to be a whole passel of baby rabbits. Well, I decided if I was running a lost and found department, I'd put them outside where their mother'd find them. Live and let live is my motto. And sure enough, I'd no sooner going inside than she came along and claimed them. I reckons Lightbuck must be near starving after his ride down the mountain. No telling how long he'd laid there in the snow before that. I figured his mother was dead, and that meant I had to take her place. Well, a little more do-it-yourself improvising, and I'd worked out a way to take care of that problem. Lightbuck, I says to him, you're all right. A few more days of this and you'll be on your feet again. Well, as I say, it was the worst winter in 50 years up along the Rimrock. I wasn't there, but I didn't have to be to know what it was like. Down where we were, the days continued warm and pleasant. And pretty soon I'd come to the conclusion that it was about time for Lightbuck to try his legs. The bad knee seemed limber and moving right. The swelling was gone. So I let him down on his feet. Easy at first, and sure enough, it was good as new. My trick had worked. I sort of stood back to see what he'd do. I was kind of tickled to see him make friends with Maud. Now I thought we'll all have a lot of nice peace and quiet around the place. I guess I didn't know then just how wrong I was. As the days wore on, the sun started getting up earlier and earlier. And somehow, with most of my chores caught up with, I started getting up later and later. Well, sir, if I slept through Maud's morning call, then things begin to happen. It got to be a regular routine. First, Lightbuck would come calling, just checking to see if I was awake. Sometimes I'd just lie there playing possum, and sometimes the trick would work. Maybe once it'd work. With old Maud, it was different. She wasn't one to be fooled. If she made up her mind to come and get me, then I was pretty well got. Because Maud wasn't about to take no for an answer. One way or the other, she was bound to get action. Our breakfast was a simple enough affair, beginning generally with a batch of good old Dutch oven biscuits. I loved them with my molasses, and if I do say so myself, I could turn out a fairly tempting panful. I remember one morning I got so wrapped up in my flapjacks I could taste them before I even had them done. Well, behind my back and quite unbeknownst to me, there was some more tasting being done. That old hay burner of mine was indulging a sweet tooth for baked goods and going about it just as bold as brass. By the time I caught on, the biscuits was long gone. A provoking critter, that Maud, but I put up with her. I knew I couldn't get along without her, and besides, I could always mix up some more biscuits. That very same morning, after breakfast, oh, I had my biscuits, you can bet on that. I got at my favorite project. You see, every year I tried to add something new to my little old house. And this year it was to be a window. A real window with honest-to-goodness glass in it. I wanted a peephole in my front door, just like some city dweller's house. Don't ask me why. I never expected any callers, but it just seemed like it'd be a nice thing to have. I'm a jack of all trades, sorta, and I can make just about anything I can get my two hands on. Well, I had that window set and centered in practically no time at all. And I felt real good about it. That was my big beautification project for the winter. I'd carried that pane of glass better than 100 miles just for this moment. There was one project I always put off as long as I could. My annual laundry. Not my semi-annual laundry, but my annual laundry. This was something I did exactly once a year. Quick as I could, I got at something I enjoyed better, which was cutting a supply of wood from a fire. There was a feel of spring in the air, and I knew winter was about over. The critters knew it too, and it did me good to see Lightbug getting so frisky. That Mandy's leg was healed good as new, and he'd be able to run like he was supposed to. He and Maud kind of cooked up a game of tag, and I got quite a kick out of watching them. Of course, it never occurred to me they'd take the clothesline with them, and all my laundry to boot. Well, sir, I wasn't going to wash them clothes again. I'd done my annual laundry. I hung them up just exactly as they were. I figured they'd dry out as clean as I needed. Spring comes early down in the canyon, earlier than up on the rim. But when the wildflowers and the cactus and the ocotillo all busted out in their finery together, I knew what it meant. It was time to begin thinking about going back upstairs. So I got out my trappings and my gear, knowing that Maud would kick up her usual fuss. It happened like this every spring. She'd get so used to a whole winter of doing nothing that she kind of hated to go back to work. I didn't blame her. I was sort of dragging my heels too. Well, Maud was a grumbling and I was a maneuvering, taking care to stay out of her way. All of a sudden, the darndest thing happened. Oh! That did it. My whole winter's work wasted. The only thing to admire, I give her credit, was her marksmanship. She'd hit the target without even looking. Well, maybe next year, a new window. Right now was time to hit the trail, and so we lit out, with Lightbuck bringing up the rear. I knew the moment we left, my tenants would be back. That was all right with me. That, you might say, was my agreement with the critters. When I was gone, it was their bunkhouse to move into whenever they wanted to. Well, sir, when we got up topside, the snow was gone. The country smelled good, and it looked like a real fine season ahead. The buffalo are still around, but I knew they would be. It takes more than a little snow to kill off a buff. Pretty soon, though, I began to wonder where all the antelope had got to. Other than Lightbuck, there wasn't one of them in sight. Plenty of buffalo, but no pronghorn. Then I began to come on sign, and it told me only one story. Most of the antelope had died out. Well, that meant that Lightbuck had only us for company, me and Maud. Oh, one day we did bump into company of a sort. A little old baby javelina came out of the brush. He was no bigger than a small tumbleweed, and he sort of took a shine to Lightbuck. It was kind of amusing to see who was scared of who and who wasn't. That little pig wasn't afraid of anything. Not even a grown man in a burro that had him outnumbered 2-1. But about that time, his mammy called him, and he traipsed off to where he belonged. Well, we spent many a day and many a night together on that high plateau. But as time slipped by, I began to get a little worried about Lightbuck. I started wondering if there was any more of his tribe within 100 miles. It was one thing to travel along with us. We enjoyed his company all right. But where he really belonged was back in a good herd of running critters like himself. Then, one morning, Maud did us all a favor. It didn't look like a favor at first. She was balking as usual, but it more'n made up for the busted window. You see, she picked up a stone in her shoe. And excepting for that, I'd never spotted the track beside the trail. It was fresh, it was antelope, and it wasn't made by Lightbuck. I knew his mark. I whistled him over, and I tried to tell him there was other pronghorn around here somewhere. I was sure of it. That very morning, we started looking in real earnest. No more prospecting for me till I'd found something twice as important. Well, sir, we just topped a little rise, and there she was, a little doe, looking pretty as all get out. For a moment, Lightbuck seemed kind of reluctant to leave us. Yet I knew he must, and he knew he must too. And finally, he went trotting out to where she was. It was kind of a touching moment. Even old Maud seemed to get the sentiment. The little gal came out looking kind of shy, and Lightbuck, he stood there looking real handsome and impressive. And when they touched noses, I knew that's the way it should be. They both looked back, kind of saying goodbye. And I realized I'd missed the little fella who'd been such a pleasant winter partner. But I knew the two of them had to get back to what they was made for, which was running across the prairie, wild and free as the wind. Me and Maud, meanwhile, we lit out for the backcountry. No telling when we might make that rich strike. It could be just over that far hill. You never know. You never know.